My son thought he was marrying the love of his life, but when his bride slapped me at the wedding reception, I revealed the truth. She wasn't just cheating, she was engaged to 2 other men at the same time. Before we dive in, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far our stories travel, and don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video with a friend who enjoys dramatic real-life tales. Your support helps us keep bringing you stories that grip you from start to finish. I always thought the happiest day of my son's life would be his wedding. As a father, I had imagined that moment for years, walking into the reception hall, watching him stand proud and nervous at the altar, and seeing his face light up when he finally said, "I do," to the woman he loved. That's what weddings are supposed to be about: joy, unity, family. But life has a strange way of teaching us lessons when we least expect them. That day, instead of gaining a daughter-in-law, I discovered a stranger. And instead of joy, I walked away with the bitter taste of betrayal on my tongue. Let me take you back. From the beginning, I wasn't entirely sure about Clara. My son Daniel introduced her to me about 2 years before the wedding. She was beautiful, confident, and had this way of taking over every room she walked into. At first, I thought maybe she was just outgoing, the kind of person who thrived in social situations. But something about her never sat right with me. She smiled too perfectly, laughed a little too loudly, and always seemed to angle the conversation back toward herself. And whenever I tried to speak with her alone about her family, her goals, her relationship with Daniel, her answers felt rehearsed, like lines from a play. I didn't want to be the overprotective father, though Daniel was in his late 20s, smart, independent, and kind-hearted. He'd gone through his share of heartbreaks, and when he looked at Clara, his eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen before. He was happy, and what more could a father want than to see his child happy? So, I bit my tongue, I ignored my instincts, and I welcomed Clara into our family, even when something deep inside me whispered that I shouldn't. The wedding planning was an ordeal. Clara wanted it big, huge. Actually, a grand ballroom, hundreds of guests, live music, photographers, videographers, extravagant flowers, custom centerpieces, the whole package. I'll admit, it made me raise an eyebrow. Daniel didn't earn the kind of money that could pay for a wedding like that, not yet. And every time Daniel hesitated at the costs, Clara would brush him off. "Don't worry, babe," she'd say, with that flawless smile. "It's just once in a lifetime. We'll figure it out." The truth was, I ended up paying for most of it. I didn't mind. I've always believed in supporting my son, especially for big milestones. But something in the way Clara demanded, and demanded without gratitude, struck me wrong. Still, I told myself, this is just pre-wedding stress. Everyone wants their special day to be perfect. The big day finally arrived. I remember standing in the mirror that morning, straightening my tie, and telling myself, this is Daniel's day. Put aside your doubts, and just be happy for him. The venue was stunning. Chandeliers sparkled overhead. The music was soft and elegant, and the guests were dressed in their finest. Daniel looked sharp in his suit, though I noticed the nervous energy in his movements. He kept smoothing his jacket, fiddling with his cufflinks, glancing toward the doors where Clara would soon walk through. When Clara entered, the room seemed to gasp. She was radiant, dressed in a gown that probably cost more than my first car. She walked with poise, her eyes locked on Daniel, and for a moment, even I felt the weight of the occasion. The ceremony went smoothly. Vows were exchanged, rings placed, promises made. Everyone clapped and cheered as Daniel kissed his bride. For a brief moment, I thought maybe I had been wrong all along. Maybe Clara really was the woman for him. I wish that had been the truth. It happened at the reception. The room was buzzing with laughter, glasses clinking, and music playing. I sat at a table near the dance floor, sipping wine and watching the festivities. Guests congratulated Daniel and Clara, took photos, and filled the hall with joy. At one point, I approached Clara to give her a small gift, a necklace that once belonged to my late wife, Daniel's mother. It was my way of welcoming her into the family, of passing down something sacred. I'll never forget what happened next. As I handed her the small velvet box, Clara's face twisted. Instead of gratitude, her eyes flashed with irritation. "What's this?" she asked, her voice sharp. I smiled softly. "It belonged to Daniel's mother. She would have wanted you to have it." The next thing I knew, her hand came across my face hard, stinging, loud enough that nearby guests gasped. The music faltered. Conversations stopped. Every eye turned toward us. My cheek burned, but not half as much as the humiliation that spread through me. My son rushed over, his face pale. "Clara, what are you doing?" she snapped back. "I don't need his hand. I'm your wife now, not her replacement." The silence in the room was deafening. I stood there, stunned, my heart pounding in my chest. I had never in my life been struck like that, let alone by the woman my son had just married. And in that moment, amid the shock, the whispers, the gaping faces, I knew with absolute certainty that Clara wasn't just ungrateful or selfish. There was something darker, something rotten hidden beneath her perfect smile. I didn't know it yet, but the slap was only the beginning. It was the crack in the mask that would soon shatter, revealing a secret so shocking it would destroy the illusion Clara had built around my son. And I was the one who would expose it. The moment Clara's hand struck my face, time seemed to freeze. The sting was sharp, but what hurt more was the disbelief in Daniel's eyes. My son stood there, torn between his father and the woman he had just promised to love forever. I could see the war inside him: embarrassment, confusion, anger, all battling for dominance. Guests whispered behind their hands. Some gasped audibly. Others stared, waiting for the explosion they were certain would follow. But I didn't explode. I stood tall, forced my hands to stay at my sides, and looked Clara directly in the eye. If she thought she could humiliate me into silence, she was mistaken. Daniel grabbed her arm. "Clara, what the hell was that?" he demanded. She yanked her arm back, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "I don't need his pity gifts. I'm your wife now, Daniel. I don't need reminders of some dead woman to define me." Gasps rippled through the room. My late wife Daniel's mother had been gone for years, but she was loved and respected by everyone who knew her. Clara's words weren't just cruel, they were venomous. I clenched my jaw, steadying myself. Part of me wanted to shout, to call her out right then and there, but another part of me knew better. Anger in that moment would only give her power. No, if Clara was bold enough to slap me in public, then she was hiding something, and I was going to find out what it was. The reception limped on awkwardly after that. The DJ restarted the music. Guests forced laughter, and Daniel tried desperately to smooth things over, but the tension never left the room. Every time Clara smiled or danced, I saw the whispers behind people's eyes. I sat quietly at my table, watching, not sulking watching. Clara was careful to stay glued to Daniel's side, never letting him out of her reach. She laughed too loudly at his jokes, kissed him with just a bit too much exaggeration. To the untrained eye, she looked like a new bride enjoying her night, but to me, she looked like a woman performing. And I had seen enough performances in my life to know when someone was faking it. Later that night, I stepped outside for some air. My cheek still burned faintly from the slap, though I knew the mark was gone. What lingered wasn't physical, it was the shame. Guests would talk. They would tell the story for years. Remember Daniel's wedding, when the bride slapped his father? I sighed and leaned against the railing, staring at the city lights. That's when I heard voices around the corner. Clara's, sharp and urgent. Another man's, low and frustrated. "You promised me," Clara hissed. My blood ran cold. I edged closer, careful not to be seen. The man's voice was tense. "Clara, this is insane. You can't marry both of us. What are you doing?" My chest tightened. "Both of us." Clara's tone dripped with manipulation. "Relax. Jason, you know I love you. But Daniel has money. Well, his father does. Once I've secured that, we'll figure out the rest. You just have to be patient." Jason, the name burned into my memory. I froze, my fists clenching at my sides. So this was it. Clara wasn't just arrogant or ungrateful, she was a liar, a con artist. She was standing in the middle of her wedding reception, married to my son, while making promises to another man. And judging by Jason's tone, Daniel wasn't the only man she'd trapped in her web. I stepped back quietly, my mind racing. Bursting out in that moment would have been satisfying, yes, but it would also have been reckless. I needed proof, something undeniable. Something Daniel couldn't dismiss, as Dad just doesn't like her. I rejoined the reception, wearing a mask of calm. Clara noticed me from across the room, her eyes narrowing briefly before she plastered on that dazzling smile again. She knew I was a problem now. She had shown her hand with the slap, and I had seen the crack in her mask. And I intended to pry it open until the entire thing shattered. The following days were tense. Daniel and Clara left for a short honeymoon, but the image of that night haunted me. I kept hearing Clara's voice. "Daniel has money, well, his father does." It made me sick to my stomach. When Daniel returned, I tried to talk to him. We sat in my living room, the same room where he had grown up, surrounded by family photos and the echoes of his mother's laughter. "Son," I began carefully, "are you sure you know everything about Clara?" He frowned. "Dad, don't start, I'm serious." "Daniel, I overheard something at the wedding." He cut me off, his voice sharp. "You just don't like her. You've never liked her. She's my wife now, and I need you to respect that." I wanted to argue, to shake him, and force the truth into his stubborn head. But I saw the look in his eyes, defensive, desperate. He loved her, he was blind, and I realized then that if I pushed too hard, I might lose him completely. So, I bit my tongue, but inside, I made a promise. I was going to sit back and watch Clara ruin my son's life. If Daniel couldn't see through her lies, then I would uncover the truth myself. That night, I pulled out my laptop and started digging. Social media, public records, anything I could find. At first, nothing stood out. Clara had carefully curated her online presence. Perfect photos, glowing captions, a spotless image. But then I found something. An engagement announcement. Not to Daniel, not even recent. It was dated just 6 months before their wedding. Clara, smiling beside a man I didn't recognize, a ring glinting on her finger. The man's name, Jason. The same name I had heard whispered outside the reception. My pulse quickened. I dug deeper, cross-referencing names, dates, places. And soon, the puzzle pieces started to click together. Clara wasn't just engaged to Jason. She had another to someone in another city. Someone whose family also had money. 3 men, 3 lives, 3 lies, and my son was one of them. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the screen illuminating my face. Clara had no idea who she was dealing with. She thought she could slap me, humiliate me, and walk away unscathed. But she had made one mistake: she underestimated a father's love. And now, I was going to bring her entire house of lies crashing down. After that night of digging, sleep was impossible. I sat at my desk until dawn, staring at the screen, scrolling through posts, reading comments, cross-checking dates. The pieces fit too perfectly to be a coincidence. Clara wasn't just reckless, she was calculated. The engagement photo with Jason was still fresh, barely 6 months old. And then there was another one I found in a small-town newspaper archive, a picture of Clara with yet another man, smiling with his arm around her, announcing their upcoming nuptials. That article was only a year old. 3 men, 3 engagements, 1 con artist. By sunrise, my jaw ached from clenching it all night. My hands trembled with a mixture of rage and fear. Rage because of what Clara was doing to Daniel. Fear because I knew how much this would crush him when he finally saw the truth. But I couldn't protect him from the pain. Not this time. The best I could do was make sure the evidence was undeniable. Over the next week, I became an investigator in my own right. I reached out to contacts I still had from my old work in business consulting. I knew people in law, finance, even a few in journalism. Quietly, I asked them to help me dig deeper into Clara's past. One of my old friends, Martin, called me late one night. "Robert, you won't believe this," he said. "Your daughter-in-law has a trail. Credit applications, leases, even a joint bank account in another state with someone who isn't your son." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Jason." "No," Martin said. "Different name. A guy named Eric. Looks like she's been living a double or triple life." My stomach churned. This wasn't just infidelity. This was fraud. Manipulation. Deception on a scale I hadn't imagined. I knew I had to be careful with Daniel. Every time I tried to bring up Clara, he shut me down. "Dad, stop it. You've got it in for her," he'd snap. "She's my wife. Can't you just be happy for me?" It tore me apart to see him so blinded. He thought he was defending the woman he loved, but really, he was defending the very person tearing his world apart. So I stayed silent around him, but my investigation never stopped. I tracked Jason down first. It wasn't hard. His engagement post with Clara was still public. He was a financial analyst, living just 2 towns over. I debated for days whether to reach out. Part of me worried it would backfire, that he wouldn't believe me. But then, I thought of Clara's smug smile at the wedding, the sting of her hand across my face, the way Daniel looked at me with disappointment instead of trust. I had no choice. I messaged Jason. We agreed to meet at a quiet coffee shop on the edge of town. When I walked in, I spotted him immediately, tall, well-dressed, but with a haunted look in his eyes. He stood when I approached. "You must be Robert," he said, extending his hand. His grip was firm, but his voice carried tension. I nodded. "And you're Jason." We sat for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I pulled a folded copy of the newspaper article from my jacket pocket and slid it across the table. It was Clara and Daniel's wedding announcement. Jason stared at it for a long time. His jaw tightened. Finally, he muttered, "So it's true." I leaned forward. "She married my son while still engaged to you." Jason's hands trembled slightly as he pushed the paper back. "She told me she just needed time, that her family pressured her into something." I believed her. His voice cracked. "God, I thought she loved me." I swallowed hard. "You're not the only one. There's another man, Eric. She's stringing you both along." Jason's eyes widened. He ran a hand through his hair, shaking his head in disbelief. "How the hell does she get away with this?" I exhaled slowly. "Because we let her. Because men like my son, men like you, want to believe her lies more than they want to face the truth." Jason agreed to help me. He had messages, photos, financial records, proof of his engagement with Clara. He shared everything with me, and I promised him that I would find a way to expose her without dragging him into public humiliation. It wasn't just about Daniel anymore. Clara had left a trail of broken lives, and I wasn't going to let her keep destroying people. The next step was Eric. Tracking him down was harder. He didn't have much of an online presence, but through Martin's contacts, I finally got a lead. Eric lived in another state, about 3 hours away. I drove out one Saturday morning, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. As I pulled up to a modest townhouse, I wondered what I would even say. "Hi, I'm Robert. My son's wife is also your..." But Eric answered the door himself. And the moment I said Clara's name, his face darkened. "I knew it," he said bitterly. "I knew something was off." We sat in his kitchen, and he showed me photos of Clara with him, trips they'd taken, gifts she'd given, love notes she'd written. She told me she was just busy with work when she disappeared for days at a time, Eric muttered. Now I see she was with someone else. I nodded grimly. With my son, and with Jason. Eric's face twisted in disgust. 3 of us. God, how does a person even live with themselves? I didn't answer. I didn't have the words. But when I left that townhouse, I carried something more valuable than anger. I carried proof. Photos, letters, records, enough to dismantle Clara's entire facade. Driving home, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For the first time in weeks, I had direction. Clara thought she had buried her secrets well, but I had unearthed every skeleton in her closet. The only question now was how to use it. Should I confront her privately? Should I go to Daniel directly? Or should I wait for the perfect moment to reveal everything, in front of everyone, the way she had humiliated me? As I pulled into my driveway, I looked up at the sky, painted with the colors of sunset. My heart was heavy, but resolute. I wasn't just fighting for my pride anymore. I was fighting for my son's future. And Clara had no idea what was coming. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a blur, and yet, every night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, questioning if I was doing the right thing. A father's duty is to protect his child, but a father's curse is the fear of losing him when the truth finally comes out. I'd already seen enough red flags with Clara to fill a field. Her charm was thin, more like a performance than a personality. Whenever Daniel was in the room, she played the perfect bride-to-be, sweet, attentive, smiling at just the right times. But the second his back was turned, I'd catch a flash in her eyes, cold and calculating, like a poker player masking their hand. I wanted to confront her outright, to demand she tell me what exactly she was hiding. But something inside me whispered, not yet. If you act too soon, she twisted all back on you. And Daniel won't believe you without proof. So, I waited, I observed, and what I saw disturbed me more than I can even put into words. One afternoon, I stopped by Daniel's place, unannounced. Clara was there, sitting cross-legged on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She barely looked up when I walked in. But what she didn't realize was that her phone reflected in the glass cabinet beside her. I caught a glimpse of a text thread, a man's name, sweetheart emojis, promises of a future. It wasn't Daniel's name. My heart sank, but I didn't let her see it. I smiled, played dumb, asked her about wedding preparations. She smiled back, just as fake as always. Inside though, I was raging. That night, I debated whether to tell Daniel. He deserved to know, but I also knew him. He was in love, blind and stubborn, in equal measure. He'd think I was overprotective, maybe even jealous of his happiness. That thought cut deeper than I can explain. The last thing I wanted was for my own son to see me as the enemy. So instead, I started digging. Quietly, carefully. I asked a friend who worked in city records to help me check Clara's background. At first, everything looked clean. No criminal record, no scandals. But then, something strange. A marriage license filed 3 years ago. Same name, same birth date, same woman. Married. I stared at that record for what felt like hours. Married. To who, and why, hadn't she ever mentioned it? The more I looked, the deeper the rabbit hole went. That marriage had ended in annulment after less than a year. And yet, when I dug into the man's name, Peter, things started to unravel. He wasn't just an ex-husband, he was still very much in her life. I found their photos together, recent ones, tucked away on social media profiles she thought were private, smiling, hand in hand. Not even 2 months before Daniel proposed to her. It was like a punch to the gut. The truth was there in front of me, but it wasn't complete. Why was she still seeing Peter? What was she planning with Daniel? Why walk into another marriage so soon? The next time I saw her, I tried dropping subtle hints. Testing her, I mentioned how hard it is to plan a wedding when you've already been through it once. Her eyes froze for just a second before she recovered with a laugh. You must be confusing me with someone else, she said, brushing it off. But I wasn't confused. I knew what I saw, and yet, I still didn't have enough. Not enough to convince Daniel. Anyway, that's when things took an even darker turn. A week later, I overheard Clara on the phone. I was eavesdropping. Intentionally, I had walked into Daniel's kitchen to grab a glass of water when I heard her voice. Sharp, angry, nothing like the syrupy tone she used around my son. No, you listen to me, she hissed. You promised me this would work out. Once this wedding is done, we'll have everything we need. Just keep your mouth shut until then. I froze. Everything we need. Keep your mouth shut. My blood ran cold. It was no longer just about Clara being unfaithful. It was about manipulation, about scheming, and Daniel was the pawn. I wanted to storm into the room right then and there, to grab my son and shake him awake from this nightmare. But once again, I bit my tongue. If I confronted her without Daniel around, she'd twist it. If I confronted her in front of him, he'd think I was sabotaging his happiness. So I made a choice. I'd gather everything, every shred of evidence, every lie she told, and when the time was right, when it could no longer be denied, lay it bare. The wedding date loomed closer, And with it, my anxiety grew heavier. The thought of my son binding himself to this woman, legally, emotionally, financially, it terrified me. I'd seen what a broken marriage could do to a man. I'd lived through friends and family torn apart by betrayal. And I wasn't going to let Daniel walk blindly into that fate. Every smile Clara flashed, every sweet word she fed my son, felt like poison, and I was the only one who could see the venom behind it. But here's the cruelest part. The closer the wedding day came, the less Daniel seemed like himself. He was stressed, yes, but more than that, he was withdrawn. When I tried to talk to him, he brushed me off. When I asked if he was happy, truly happy, he gave me a tired smile that didn't reach his eyes. And that's when I realized. Maybe he already suspected. Maybe deep down, he knew something was off. But love is blinding, and I feared that by the time his eyes opened, it would be too late. The night before the wedding, I sat alone in my living room, staring at the box of evidence I had gathered: documents, screenshots, photos, even a copy of that annulment record. My hands trembled as I closed the lid. Tomorrow, I thought, tomorrow I'll finally reveal the truth. Tomorrow, everything changes. I had no idea just how explosive that tomorrow would be. The morning of the wedding arrived with a heaviness I can't quite describe. Most fathers dream of this day, seeing their son at the altar, glowing with joy, ready to start a new life. I wanted to feel that same pride. I wanted to stand tall and smile as Daniel tied the knot. But instead, I woke with a knot in my stomach that no amount of coffee could untangle. I dressed carefully, staring at myself in the mirror longer than usual. I thought about what I was about to do, about how, in just a few hours, I might shatter my son's heart in order to save it. My reflection looked older that day, tired, worn, but beneath the exhaustion, I saw a determination. When I arrived at the venue, the place was buzzing with energy. White roses lined the aisles, violins played softly in the background, and guests were filing in with excitement painted across their faces. To them, it was a perfect day. To me, it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. Daniel found me before the ceremony. He looked sharp in his suit, but his eyes, they told another story. They looked restless, clouded, almost haunted. "Dad," he said, adjusting his tie nervously. "Thanks for being here." I put my hand on his shoulder. "Of course I'm here." Always. He gave me a quick smile, but it was strained. I hope today goes smoothly. Clara's been stressing about every little detail. You know how she gets." I bit back the truth sitting on my tongue. I wanted to say, it's not just the flowers and the music she's worried about tits, the lies catching up with her. But instead, I nodded. "Don't worry, son. Whatever happens, we'll face it." The ceremony itself passed like a dream. Clara walked down the aisle, radiant in her dress, every eye on her. She smiled at Daniel, and for a moment, I almost believed the illusion myself. Almost, but when the vows were exchanged, my chest tightened. Daniel's voice shook with sincerity, every word a promise from his heart. Clara's, however, sounded rehearsed, like lines in a play. Only I seemed to notice the hollowness behind her eyes. Then came the reception. That's where everything began to unravel. The hall was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the smell of roasted chicken and wine. Speeches were made, toasts raised. I sat at the head table, quietly watching Clara like a hawk. It was during the father-son dance that I realized the moment I'd been waiting for might arrive sooner than I thought. As I danced with Daniel, whispering how proud I was of him, Clara was across the room, glued to her phone. Again, something snapped inside me. Enough hiding, enough waiting. After the dance, I approached Clara. My voice was calm, almost too calm, as I said, "Enjoying yourself?" She looked at me, flashing that fake smile. Of course, why wouldn't I be? I leaned in, low enough that only she could hear. Because secrets have a way of catching up to people, and yours are running out of time. Her smile faltered for just a moment before she quickly recovered. "You really should stop drinking. Robert," she hissed. "You're starting to sound paranoid." I didn't answer. I simply walked away. I knew my silence would unnerve her more than any accusation. Then it happened. The moment that changed everything. As the night carried on, one of the groomsmen announced a surprise slideshow of the couple's journey. Photos, videos, memories. Everyone clapped and gathered to watch. But halfway through, something unexpected appeared on the screen. A photo of Clara, not with Daniel, but with another man, holding hands, kissing, dated just 6 months ago. The room went dead silent. Gasps echoed. Clara's face went pale. I hadn't planned that. To this day, I don't know who slipped those photos into the slideshow, but I thanked God for it. Daniel turned to Clara, confusion and anger battling in his eyes. "What is this?" he demanded. Clara stumbled for words. That's nothing. Just an old friend." I stepped forward then, my heart pounding. "That's not an old friend, Daniel, that's her." One of them. The room erupted in whispers. Clara spun toward me, her face twisting with rage. And then, in front of everyone, my family. Her family, our friends. She slapped me. The sting across my cheek was nothing compared to the fire in my chest. I straightened, meeting her eyes without flinching. "You've made a mistake, Clara, a grave one." Daniel stood frozen, his chest heaving. Dad, what are you talking about? This was it, the moment I'd been preparing for. Slowly, I reached into my jacket and pulled out the folder I'd been carrying all day. I laid it on the table and flipped it open. Inside were the records, the annulment papers, the photos, the proof of her lies. Gasps filled the room as guests leaned in to see. Clara isn't who she says she is, I said, my voice steady. She was married before, and she's been engaged not just to you, Daniel, but to two other men. At the same time, Daniel's face crumbled. He looked at Clara, then back at me, then at the evidence laid bare for all to see. His hands shook as he reached for the papers. Clara tried to grab them first, but he pulled them away. Is this true? He shouted. Her silence was louder than any confession. The room spun with chaos. Some guests stormed out, others whispered feverishly. Clara's parents buried their faces in shame, and Daniel, my son, fell to his knees as the weight of betrayal crushed him. I knelt beside him, putting my hand on his shoulder. I'm sorry, son, I didn't want it to happen like this. But you needed to know the truth before it was too late. His eyes brimmed with tears, but he nodded slowly. You saved me, Dad. At that moment, I felt both relief and heartbreak. Relief that the truth was finally out. Heartbreak that it had come to this. The wedding was over, the illusion shattered, and though Clara tried desperately to talk her way out of it, there was no salvaging her lies. As I helped Daniel to his feet, I knew one thing for certain. Our lives would never be the same again. The days that followed the wedding felt like walking through the wreckage of a storm. Everything lay in pieces: plans, promises, trust, and at the center of it all was my son, broken in ways that words can't capture. I stayed with Daniel that first night after the fiasco. He didn't want to be alone, and I couldn't leave him even if I tried. He sat on the edge of his bed in his rumpled suit, staring at the floor, silent. The kind of silence that crushes a room. Dad, he finally whispered, his voice hoarse. How could I not see it? How could I be so blind? I sat beside him, putting an arm around his shoulders. Love blinds us all, son. It's not weakness, it's trust, and you trusted her. That's nothing to be ashamed of. He shook his head, tears streaming down his cheeks. But I almost gave her everything. My future, my money, my name. Everything. I tightened my grip on him. No, you didn't, because the truth came out in time. You're hurt, yes, but you're not ruined. That's the difference. He leaned against me then, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was holding my little boy again. It's strange how pain can strip us down, bringing us back to the most vulnerable parts of ourselves. But while Daniel mourned, Clara raged. The very next morning, she came storming into his apartment, demanding to set the record straight. I was there, and I blocked the door before she could reach him. You've said enough, I told her firmly. She sneered at me, her eyes blazing. You think you've won, old man, you've ruined everything. No, I said quietly. You did that yourself. Daniel appeared behind me, his face pale but resolute. Clara, it's over. Don't come back. She tried everything: tears, apologies, even threats. At one point, she spat. You'll regret this, Daniel, you'll regret listening to him. But he didn't waver. For the first time, I saw my son's eyes clear. He wasn't blind anymore. When she finally left, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled, Daniel collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. God, Dad, she almost had me. Yes, I said softly. But almost doesn't count. In the days that followed, the fallout spread like wildfire. Guests who had been at the wedding told others, and soon enough, Clara's web of lies started unraveling in public. The other two men she'd been engaged to. They found out. I don't know who contacted who first, but I later heard that both of them confronted her. One even threatened legal action for fraud. It was as if the mask she'd worn for so long had finally been ripped off, and the world could see the truth. But the world's judgment wasn't my concern. My concern was my son. Healing him. Every night, I cooked him dinner. Simple meals, the way his mother used to. I sat with him, listened as he poured out his anger and grief. Some nights he shouted, pounding his fists on the table, cursing Clara's name. Other nights he wept like a boy, lost in the dark. And through it all, I reminded him, you survived. That's what matters. One evening, about a week later, he asked me something that broke my heart. Dad, did Mom see this? From wherever she is, do you think she saw what happened? I swallowed hard, blinking back my own tears. Yes, son, she saw, and she's proud of you. Not because of what happened, but because you had the strength to face it. She raised a man who can stand again after falling. Daniel nodded slowly, and in that moment, I knew he was beginning to heal. But healing doesn't mean forgetting, and I wasn't about to let Clara walk away unscathed. I began gathering the evidence I had collected: the annulment, the photos, the texts. I made sure copies found their way into the hands of those other men she had betrayed. I didn't have to raise my voice or seek revenge directly. The truth itself was the sword, and it cut deep enough. As for Daniel, he started to regain his footing. He went back to work, threw himself into projects, surrounded himself with friends who truly cared. I encouraged him to stay busy, but I also reminded him not to bury the pain too deep. Pain ignored only festers. Pain faced becomes strength. One night, as we sat on his balcony watching the city lights, he turned to me and said, "Dad, thank you for everything. For protecting me, even when I didn't see the danger. For standing by me, even when I doubted you." I put my hand on his shoulder, my throat tight. That's what fathers are for. We stand guard, even when our children don't see the wolves at the door. He gave me a faint smile, the first real one since the wedding. "I don't know if I'll ever trust someone again." "You will," I told him. "But this time, you'll trust with your eyes open." Thus the gift. Pain gives us clarity. The wedding that should have been a beginning had turned into an ending. But sometimes, endings are mercies in disguise. Clara had tried to steal his future, but instead, she gave him something else: freedom. As for me, I felt a strange mix of sorrow and triumph. Sorrow for the hurt my son endured, triumph that I had stopped the damage before it destroyed him completely. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of Clara's story. A woman like her doesn't fade quietly. But whatever storms she stirred next, Daniel was no longer in her grasp. He was free, and I would make sure he stayed that way. In the weeks that followed, life began to settle into a fragile rhythm. Daniel went back to his job. I returned to mine, and the world outside seemed to move on. But inside our little bubble, the wounds were still fresh, and the scars not yet formed. I'd wake some mornings to find Daniel already awake, sitting on the couch in silence, staring at nothing. Other days, he threw himself into work until his body gave out from exhaustion. I recognized the pattern. It was the dance of a man trying to outrun grief. But grief is faster than we think. It always catches up. One evening, I sat down with him over dinner. "Son," I said, "you don't have to pretend you're okay for my sake. Pain doesn't make you weak, it makes you human." He sighed, rubbing his temples. I just keep hearing her voice. Dad, all the promises she made, all the times she said I was the only one, and then seeing those pictures, those records. It's like I don't even know what's real anymore. I reached across the table and gripped his hand. What's real is, you survived it. What's real is you still have your life, your future, your family. That's the truth. Hold on to that. But while Daniel wrestled with his pain, Clara was unraveling. The fallout from the wedding didn't just sting, it scorched her. Word spread fast, faster than even I expected. The two other men she'd been engaged to didn't stay silent. They spoke, they raged. And soon, Clara's name was being whispered in every corner of our town, not as a bride, but as a fraud. One of them, a man named Peter, even reached out to me directly. He called, late one evening, his voice sharp with anger. "You did the right thing at that wedding," he told me. "If you hadn't exposed her, she would have ruined me too. She promised me everything. She said she loved me, and the whole time, she was planning a wedding with your son." I could hear the bitterness in his voice, the humiliation. "I'm sorry you went through it," I said. "No man deserves that." He exhaled heavily. "I'm pressing charges. Fraud, misrepresentation, whatever my lawyer can find. I suggest your son does the same." When I hung up, I felt a strange sense of justice stirring. Clara had played with fire, and now she was burning. But justice didn't heal Daniel. That was my mission. I started taking him on long drives, just like I used to when he was a kid. Sometimes we didn't talk much. We just drove, the road stretching out before us, the silence comfortable instead of heavy. Other times, he opened up in ways he hadn't before about his fears, his doubts, even his anger at me for not telling him sooner. And I accepted it. All of it, because healing isn't neat. It's messy, and sometimes, love means letting someone pour their pain on you, knowing you're strong enough to carry it. One afternoon, weeks after the wedding, Daniel finally asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Dad, why didn't you tell me earlier? Why didn't you stop it before it got that far?" I took a deep breath. "Because I needed you to see it for yourself. If I'd come to you with only suspicion, you wouldn't have believed me. Love would have blinded you. You would have thought I was trying to ruin your happiness, and I couldn't risk that. I had to wait until the truth could no longer be denied." He nodded slowly, though I could see the conflict in his eyes. "I hated you for a second. You know, when you pulled out those papers, I thought you were trying to humiliate her, but now, I realized you saved me." I put my hand on his shoulder. "That's all I ever wanted. To save you." As the weeks turned to months, the darkness began to lift. Daniel started smiling again, laughing again, finding pieces of himself he thought he'd lost. It was a slow climb, but a steady one, and Clara, her descent was the opposite. I heard rumors she lost her job, her reputation, even some friends who once worshipped her charm. Every bridge she built on lies had gone up in flames. One evening, Daniel came home from work and told me he'd run into her at a coffee shop. "She looked different," he said. "Not glamorous, not confident, just tired, beaten down." I studied his face carefully. "And how did that make you feel?" He paused, then shrugged. "Strangely enough, nothing. I thought I'd feel anger or satisfaction, but instead, I just felt free. Like she has no power over me anymore." I smiled, pride swelling in my chest. That's because she doesn't. You took back your life the day you walked away. And he had. That was the true victory. Not Clara's downfall, not the justice she faced, but Daniel's freedom, his clarity. Still, I couldn't shake a lingering thought. What if I hadn't been there? What if no one had caught her lies? My son's life could have been ruined, his future stolen. And that thought kept me sharp. It reminded me that love isn't just about letting our children live freely at us, about protecting them when the wolves come knocking. And Clara, she was the wolf. But now, she was gone. Or so I thought. Because even though her world was collapsing, I had a feeling Clara wasn't finished. Women like her rarely are. I should have known it wasn't over. With people like Clara, it rarely is. The day came unexpectedly. I was returning from the grocery store, arms full of bags, when I saw her waiting on my front porch. She was dressed down, no expensive jewelry, no carefully applied makeup, no glowing confidence. Instead, her eyes were rimmed red, her shoulders slumped, and for the first time since I had met her, she looked ordinary. "Mr. Duncan," she said softly, rising to her feet. I set the grocery bags down just inside the doorway before stepping back outside. "Clara," my tone was even cautious. "You shouldn't be here." She clasped her hands together, trembling slightly. "Please, just give me 5 minutes. I need to explain. To you, to Daniel, to anyone who will listen." I folded my arms, holding her gaze. "You had plenty of chances to explain, Clara. At the wedding, when the truth was right in front of you. And instead, you slapped me in front of 50 people." Her face flushed with shame. I panicked. Everything was crumbling around me, and I didn't know how to react. "But I swear, Mr. Duncan, I did love Daniel. Maybe not in the pure way you wanted, but he gave me stability, safety. I wasn't using him. Not entirely." I let out a humorless laugh. "Not entirely. You were engaged to 3 men at the same time. How much more using does it get?" Tears welled in her eyes, and for a fleeting moment, I almost believed they were genuine. Almost, but I had seen her switch masks too many times before. I knew her tears were just another weapon. "What do you want from me, Clara?" I asked finally. "Because forgiveness isn't mine to give, and reconciliation sure as hell isn't in your future." She bit her lip, hesitating. "I need Daniel to hear me out. Just once. If he never wants to see me again after that, I'll accept it. But please, can you just tell him I came here? That I'm not the monster everyone paints me to be." I shook my head. "You painted yourself that way. You chose deceit. You built a life out of lies. And now you're living in the ruins of your own creation." Her composure cracked. "Do you think I wanted it this way? Do you think I enjoyed juggling men? Lying every night, keeping track of who I told what? It was exhausting, but I was terrified. Terrified of being nothing, of being poor again, of going back to the life I had before." For a second, her words pierced through my anger. I understood fear. I understood desperation. But fear doesn't excuse destruction. "Clara," I said quietly, "fear doesn't give you the right to destroy good men's lives. Daniel, Peter, the others. They deserved love, not manipulation. They deserved truth, and you couldn't give it." She stared at me, and then, as if a switch had flipped, the tears vanished. Her voice hardened. "So that's it. You'll just turn him against me forever." "No," I replied calmly. "You did that all on your own." She opened her mouth to argue further, but before she could, Daniel's car pulled into the driveway. My heart sank. This was the one thing I'd wanted to avoid. Daniel stepped out, carrying a folder of work papers, his eyes narrowing the moment he saw her. "Clara, what are you doing here?" She rushed toward him, her voice breaking. "Daniel, please, just let me talk. 5 minutes. That's all I ask." He froze, looking at me. "Did you know she was coming?" "No," I said firmly. "I came home and found her waiting here." Daniel set his papers on the hood of his car and crossed his arms. "Fine, talk. 5 minutes." Her words tumbled out in a rush. How she'd been lost. How she made mistakes. How her fear of poverty pushed her to desperate choices. She begged him to remember the good times, the laughter, the moments they'd shared. But Daniel didn't waver. His face stayed hard, his eyes unblinking. When she finally stopped, breathless, he shook his head. "Clara, I don't hate you, but I don't love you anymore either. What you did, it broke something in me that can't be fixed. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed who I thought I was when I was with you, and that's unforgivable." Her lips trembled. "So, that's it, you're just going to walk away." After everything we had, he stepped back, closer to me. "There's nothing to walk away from. It's already gone." Her eyes flicked between us, and then she let out a bitter laugh. "Fine, go ahead, pretend you're better off without me. But one day, Daniel, you'll realize women like me don't come around twice. And when you're sitting alone, you'll remember what you threw away." She spun on her heel and stormed down the driveway, her footsteps echoing like gunshots. Moments later, her car screeched away, leaving silence in her wake. Daniel exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging. "You were right, Dad, she hasn't changed. She never will." I put a hand on his back. Sometimes people don't want to change. They cling to who they are, even if it destroys them. But you, I squeezed gently. You've already changed. You're stronger now, wiser. That's what matters. He looked at me with tired but steady eyes. Thank you for standing by me, even when I didn't want you to. I nodded. That's what fathers do. As the evening sun dipped behind the trees, I felt the weight of the past months lifting. Clara was gone, truly gone this time, and for the first time in a long while, I believed my son could finally heal. After Clara's final outburst on our driveway, life didn't magically reset. Healing never works like that. But what did happen was silence, a silence that slowly made space for something better. In the weeks that followed, Daniel withdrew a little. He kept to himself, went to work, came home, ate dinner with me, and then sat on the porch staring at the night sky. At first, I worried he was slipping into despair, but I came to realize he wasn't falling apart, he was rebuilding. Quietly, brick by brick. One evening, I sat beside him on the porch swing, 2 mugs of coffee between us. He didn't look at me when he spoke. Dad, do you think I'll ever trust someone again? I sipped my coffee before answering. Yes, not right away, and not the same way as before. But trust isn't something Clara destroyed and you it something you'll choose to give again. And when you do, it'll be wiser, stronger, more grounded. He nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the stars. I don't want to be bitter. I don't want to hate women because of her. You won't, I said firmly, because you're not her. You're not defined by her lies. You're defined by how you rise after them. He turned then, studying me. You've always been steady, Dad. I don't know how you do it. I smiled faintly. Oh, I've been knocked down more times than I can count. Your mother, God rest her soul, saw me at my lowest, but she also taught me something. That strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up, even when it hurts, like hell. The conversation stayed with me, and I could see the lessons slowly sinking into Daniel. He threw himself into work, into hobbies he'd neglected: fishing, reading, even picking up the guitar he hadn't touched since college. Day by day, he was rediscovering himself. And then one afternoon, months later, he walked into the living room with a small smile on his face. Dad, I met someone. I raised an eyebrow but didn't press. He explained she wasn't a rebound, wasn't some flashy distraction, just a kind, thoughtful woman he'd met through a mutual friend. They'd had coffee, talked for hours, and for the first time since Clara, he felt peace. I looked him in the eye. Take it slow, don't rush, but don't let the past chain you either. You deserve happiness, Daniel. Real happiness. He nodded, and I could tell this time was different. That night, alone in my room, I reflected on everything, from the moment Clara entered our lives, to the lies, the betrayal, the slap at the wedding, the public unraveling, and finally, her bitter exit. It felt like an entire lifetime had passed in just a few months. And through it all, I realized something. The story wasn't about her at all. It was about my son, about watching him grow, watching him survive heartbreak, watching him refuse to let deceit define his future. Clara thought she had power because she could manipulate. But the truth is, power doesn't come from controlling others. It comes from integrity, resilience, and love, the very things she lacked, and the very things Daniel was rediscovering. A year later, I stood once again in a wedding hall. This time, it wasn't filled with tension and secrets. It was filled with joy, laughter, and a quiet kind of confidence. Daniel stood at the altar, but this time beside a woman who looked at him not with calculation, but with genuine affection. As I watched him say his vows, I felt my chest swell with pride. Not just because he found someone new, but because he had found himself, again, stronger, wiser, braver. When the ceremony ended, Daniel sought me out. He pulled me into a hug and whispered, "Thank you, Dad, for never giving up on me, for protecting me when I didn't see the danger, for reminding me who I am." I hugged him back tightly. "That's my job, son, and I'll never stop." Later that night, as I sat under the fairy lights strung across the reception yard, I thought about Clara. Where was she now? Was she still running the same cycle, chasing security through deceit, or had she finally learned? The truth is, I didn't know, and I didn't care. She no longer had a place in our story. What mattered was that my son had walked through fire and come out stronger, and as his father, I had the privilege of watching him rise from the ashes. So if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's this. Betrayal doesn't define us. It wounds us. Yes, it changes us. Absolutely. But it also gives us a chance to rebuild, not as the same people we were, but as wiser, tougher versions of ourselves. And as I looked at Daniel that night, laughing with his new bride, surrounded by people who truly loved him, I realized something important. The lies that tried to break us had only made our bond stronger. And no deceit, no betrayal, no slap in the face, literal or otherwise, could ever take that away. If you felt this story, hit like and subscribe for more. I'll see you in the next one.